The borderline was wrong. Grace Miller saw it before she saw the king. Before the silver goblets were polished into mirrors. Before the black candles were lit along the treaty table. Before the nobles arrived in velvet, wolf fur, and old family pride. Before the guards took their places beneath the iron banners of North Iron Territory and pretended the entire hall did not smell like fear covered in expensive wine. She saw the line because she was close enough to clean it. That was the privilege of being invisible. A maid could stand beside the most powerful table in Ironvale Hall with a damp cloth in one hand and a bucket of cloudy water at her feet, and no one would wonder what her eyes were doing. No one asked whether she could read the map beneath the glass. No one imagined that a girl in a gray dress and white apron might understand the shape of a kingdom better than men who had spent their lives signing pieces of it away. Grace wiped a thin smear of wax from the corner of the treaty table and looked down. The map was beautiful. That was the first lie. Thick cream parchment. Mountain ridges shaded in charcoal. Rivers drawn in blue ink, so fine they looked wet under the lantern light. Small red markers for watchtowers. Black squares for fortresses. A silver thread stitched through the northern border where the Old War line had been fixed after the Ashfall Rebellion. And there, near the western edge, Raven Pass curved wrong. Grace's hand stopped. The cloth hung limp between her fingers. Raven Pass was supposed to bend inward toward North Iron Land, protected by 2 cliffs and a narrow pine road that could hold back an army if 50 wolves stood their ground. Her father had called it the throat of the territory. Lose the throat, and the whole body chokes. But on this map, the borderline slipped around the pass like a quiet knife. One small curve. One elegant alteration. Enough to place Raven Pass inside Westbrook Claim. Grace's heartbeat became loud in her ears. She looked toward the dais, where the treaty chair had been placed for Alpha King Nathaniel Ward. Black oak. High back. Wolf heads carved into the arms. Above it hung the North Iron banner, a white wolf beneath a crown of dark steel. The hall had been scrubbed, perfumed, and dressed for peace, but the treaty on the table did not feel like peace. It felt like a door being opened from the inside. Girl. Grace straightened so fast her shoulder nearly struck the table. A guard stood beside the nearest pillar, his expression already bored with her existence. Do not drip water on the treaty table. Yes, sir. Her voice came out quiet. It was safer that way. She lowered her eyes, dipped the cloth into the bucket, wrung it carefully, and stepped back exactly 3 paces. Not too fast. Servants who moved too fast looked guilty. Not too slow. Servants who moved too slow were punished for making important people wait. The guard looked away. Grace looked down again. Raven Pass remained wrong. A cold memory moved through her, unwanted and sharp. Her father's hands spread over a map in their kitchen, ink staining the side of his thumb, his voice low because walls in poor houses heard too much. Remember the pass, Gracie. If anyone redraws that line, they are not negotiating. They are surrendering the kingdom while calling it peace. He had disappeared 6 years later. Not died officially. Disappeared. That was the word used when powerful men did not want a body found. Grace swallowed and forced her fingers to move. She collected a fallen ribbon from one chair, straightened 3 goblets, and brushed invisible dust from the edge of the black oak table. Around her, Ironvale Hall filled slowly with sound. Servants entered carrying wine. Scribes arranged ink pots. Guards checked windows. Nobles drifted in with soft voices and hard eyes, whispering about the Westbrook delegation, about stability, about how fortunate the kingdom was to have Beta Caleb Morrison handling the documents. Grace heard that name 3 times before the man entered. Caleb Morrison, the Alpha King's right hand, trusted advisor, keeper of the treaty folder, the man everyone said had made peace possible. Grace looked once more at Raven Pass, then at the leather folder placed near the king's chair, closed with dark cord and sealed in red wax. A hairline crack ran through the seal. Small. Almost nothing. Exactly the kind of thing no one important would notice because no one important expected betrayal to arrive polished. Grace stepped closer, pretending to adjust the silver tray near the folder. The wax mark should have carried the clean press of the North Iron Wolf crown. Instead, the crown's left point was blurred, slightly swollen, as if the seal had been remade from a copy. Her stomach tightened. Wrong border. Cracked seal. A treaty table dressed for peace. Back, the same guard snapped. Grace obeyed. That was what maids did. They stepped back. They lowered their eyes. They carried water, folded linen, swallowed warnings, and survived by becoming part of the furniture powerful people trusted not to speak. But across the hall, the great doors began to open. The nobles fell silent. The guards straightened. And Grace Miller stood beside the treaty table with wet hands, a pounding heart, and the terrible knowledge that the Alpha King was about to walk into a room where his kingdom had already been moved by a line of ink. The Alpha King entered without hurry. That was the first thing Grace noticed. Men who feared being ignored filled rooms with noise. They struck their boots hard against stone, laughed too loudly, let their guards announce every title as if power could be built from echoes. Nathaniel Ward did none of that. He stepped through the open doors of Ironvale Hall, as if the silence already belonged to him. The great chamber lowered itself around his presence. Nobles stopped whispering. Scribes bowed over their papers. Guards straightened until their armor gave faint, nervous clicks. Even the black candles along the treaty table seemed to burn steadier, their flames narrow and watchful beneath the iron banners of North Iron Territory. Grace stood 3 paces from the table with her damp cloth folded in both hands. Not moving, not breathing too deeply, not looking directly at him because maids were not meant to stare at kings. But she saw enough. Alpha King Nathaniel Ward was taller than the men around him, broad-shouldered beneath a black formal coat fastened with dark silver clasps. His hair was dark, brushed back from a face too controlled to be called calm. Calm belonged to men who had nothing to lose. Nathaniel looked like a man who had lost before and had taught every muscle never to admit it again. His eyes moved once across the hall. Gray, cold, precise. They passed over nobles, guards, scribes, servants, candles, maps, goblets, and for one brief second, Grace felt as though those eyes had touched the damp cloth in her hands and the warning trapped behind her teeth. Then they moved on. Of course they did. She was only a maid. Beside him walked Beta Caleb Morrison. Where Nathaniel was stillness, Caleb was ease. He wore a deep charcoal coat trimmed in silver, his blonde hair neatly combed, his smile measured enough to look respectful without seeming weak. In one hand, he carried the leather treaty folder Grace had already seen on the table earlier, or perhaps another one exactly like it. The red wax seal faced outward, unbroken beneath the lanterns. Too perfect. Grace's eyes dropped to the folder lying near the king's chair. It was gone. Her stomach tightened. No one else noticed because Caleb was speaking now, his voice smooth and warm, carrying to every corner of the hall. Your Majesty, Alpha Roland Pierce waits with his delegation. Westbrook has agreed to the final border language. Tonight ends 3 generations of dispute. Soft approval moved through the nobles. Peace was a beautiful word, beautiful enough to hide almost anything. Nathaniel did not smile. And Raven Pass? Grace's fingers tightened around the cloth. Caleb did not hesitate. Secured under North Iron protection, as you ordered. The lie sounded clean. That made it worse. A crude lie stumbled. A practiced lie walked through a hall in polished boots and bowed at the proper time. Nathaniel looked toward the treaty table. I will read the final draft before I sign. Of course, Caleb said. Still smooth. Still loyal. But his left hand shifted over the lower edge of the folder, thumb pressing down as if holding something thin in place beneath the main pages. Grace saw it. A pale corner of parchment. Almost hidden. Not part of the first treaty sheet. A second page. A buried page. Alpha Roland Pierce entered from the western doors then, dressed in dark green with 2 Westbrook wolves behind him. He smiled too quickly when he saw Caleb. Caleb's eyes flicked toward him once, brief as a knife flash. Not greeting. Signal. Grace felt the hall tilt around her. Wrong border. False seal. Switched folder. Hidden page. Signal between Beta and Westbrook Alpha. Her father's voice rose in memory, quieter than a whisper and heavier than blood. When a kingdom is sold, Gracie, it will not look like theft. It will look like paperwork. Nathaniel took his seat at the black oak chair. Caleb placed the leather folder before him with both hands and bowed. Grace watched the hidden page disappear beneath the treaty, and for the first time in her life, she understood that being invisible might not save her. It might be the only reason she had seen enough to save him. Grace should have looked away. That was what survival required. A maid did not study royal documents. A maid did not measure the silence between a king and his beta. A maid did not watch the hand of a traitor too closely, especially when that traitor stood close enough to the throne to make his lies sound like law. But Grace kept looking, because the map was still wrong. Raven Pass sat beneath the glass at the center of the treaty table, drawn with careful ink and beautiful treachery. The false border curved westward in a graceful black line, placing the pass beyond North Iron Claim. To anyone else, it looked like a minor adjustment, the kind of compromise diplomats praised after too much wine. To Grace, it looked like an open gate. She moved along the table with a silver pitcher, filling goblets because servants were allowed near secrets when their hands were full. Her eyes stayed lowered, but not blind. She watched reflections in polished cups. She watched Caleb Morrison's sleeve. She watched the leather treaty folder as he opened it before Nathaniel Ward. The first page was harmless. Too harmless. It spoke of peace, shared trade roads, patrol rights, and mutual respect between North Iron and Westbrook. Words meant to soften sharp things. Words meant to make nobles nod before anyone asked where the border had moved. Then Caleb shifted his left hand. There it was again. A thin page beneath the main treaty, almost translucent, its corner tucked under the fold of the leather cover. Not attached with ribbon. Not marked by the scribes. Hidden in plain sight because no one expected the Alpha King's own beta to conceal a second agreement beneath the first. Grace poured water into Alpha Roland Pierce's goblet. His hand covered the stem before she finished. Not to drink. To hide the smile. Caleb leaned toward him as if adjusting the treaty's lower edge. Grace heard only 7 words. He will sign before he notices. The pitcher slipped half an inch in her hand. Water struck the rim of the goblet and spilled onto the table. A noblewoman near the dais hissed, "Clumsy girl." Grace bowed at once. "Forgive me, my lady." Her voice was small. Her mind was not. As she dabbed the spill with her cloth, she saw the second detail fully. The wax seal on the treaty folder did not match the royal seal embossed on the black invitation cards placed before the nobles. The true North Iron Wolf had 3 crown points above its head. This one had 4. A copy made by someone who had seen the seal often, but not carefully enough. Grace's throat tightened. Her father had taught her that too. Forgers always respect the large shape. They fail in the small teeth, the claw marks, the crown points. Never trust a seal until you count what pride forgets. She counted again. 4. Wrong. Then she saw the watermark. The corner of the hidden page caught the lantern light for half a breath, and a pale symbol appeared inside the parchment. Not North Iron paper. Westbrook stock. Their pine branch mark, faint but unmistakable, buried beneath treaty language that would carry Nathaniel's signature if Caleb placed it under his hand at the right moment. 3 lies. The border. The seal. The hidden Westbrook page. Grace's pulse beat against her ribs so hard it hurt. Nathaniel reached for the treaty. Caleb smiled. And Grace understood with sudden, sick clarity that the Alpha King was not about to sign peace. He was about to sign away the throat of his kingdom while every powerful person in the hall watched and called it wisdom. Grace took 1 step toward the king. Only 1. It should not have mattered. A maid moving beside a treaty table was nothing. A gray dress in the corner of a royal hall. A pair of wet hands. A folded cloth. A breath that no one important had given permission to become a voice. But Caleb Morrison saw her move. That was the first proof that he knew. His eyes cut toward her before the guards did, sharp and bright beneath the smooth mask of loyalty. His hand remained on the leather folder, palms spread over the hidden page as if he could press the lie deeper into the table by will alone. Grace stopped. Nathaniel Ward had not yet looked at her. He was reading the first treaty page, his expression unreadable, one hand resting near the black fountain pen placed beside the inkstand. The pen was silver-tipped, heavy, ceremonial, made for a signature that would change borders while candles burned and nobles smiled. Grace felt the room narrowing. If she waited, he would sign. If she spoke, she might not survive the sentence. Her father's voice returned, not gentle this time. "A wrong border is not ink, Gracie. It is blood waiting for permission." "Your Majesty," Grace said. The words sounded too loud. The nearest guard seized her arm before the final syllable finished leaving her mouth. "What are you doing?" he hissed. Grace kept her eyes on the table. "The map is wrong." The hall reacted as if she had dropped a knife. Whispers broke open among the nobles. A scribe froze with his quill above the paper. Alpha Roland Pierce's smile vanished so quickly Grace almost doubted she had seen it at all. Nathaniel lifted his gaze. For 1 second, his gray eyes found her. Not kind, not angry. Waiting. That was worse. Waiting gave her room to be brave or foolish, and Grace was not sure yet which one would kill her faster. Caleb laughed softly. A maid is concerned about cartography? Some of the nobles smiled because he had given them permission. Grace's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to speak again. Raven Pass is drawn west of the old war line. It belongs inside North Iron Claim. The guard tightened his grip. Pain shot up her arm. Enough, he said. A noblewoman near the front lifted a lace fan to her mouth. She probably cannot read the table numbers, let alone a border map. A few people laughed. Small laughter. Cruel because it was safe. Grace swallowed it like smoke. Caleb stepped closer, his smile calm now, almost pitying. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. Servants have been nervous all evening. The girl likely overheard scraps from the kitchen and mistook them for knowledge. I heard you, Grace said. The laughter stopped. Caleb's eyes hardened. Grace knew then she had touched the dangerous part. Nathaniel's gaze moved from her face to Caleb. What did she hear? Caleb bowed his head slightly. Nothing of consequence. He said you would sign before you noticed, Grace said. The room died around the words. Even the candle flames seemed to lean away. Alpha Roland's hand closed around his goblet. Caleb's smile disappeared completely. Then he turned, not to Nathaniel, but to the guards. Remove her from the hall. 2 more guards moved at once. Grace pulled against the hand on her arm. There is a second page under the treaty. The seal is wrong. Count the crown points. Silence her, Caleb snapped. There. Not remove her. Silence her. Nathaniel heard it. Grace saw the shift in him, almost invisible, like a blade being drawn beneath a cloak. But he did not speak fast enough. The guards dragged Grace backward. Her shoes slipped against the polished floor. The cloth fell from her hand. Someone gasped when the bucket by the table tipped, sending cloudy water across the black stone. Grace twisted once, desperate, and caught sight of Caleb's left hand sliding the hidden page closer to the pen. Nathaniel looked down. Caleb bowed toward him. The ceremony was still moving. The lie was still breathing. Grace's back struck the edge of the serving table. Silver trays rattled behind her. A wineglass tipped, rolled, and stopped against her hip. Her fingers closed around the corner of the tablecloth. The king's hand moved toward the pen. No one would listen to a maid. So Grace stopped trying to be heard politely. She pulled. The sound came first. Silver striking stone. 1 tray hit the floor, then another, then 3 goblets followed in a bright, violent scatter that shattered the ceremony more completely than any shout could have. Wine splashed across polished black tile. A bowl of sugared figs overturned beneath a nobleman's boots. The white tablecloth snapped through Grace's hands like a sail caught in storm wind. The entire hall turned. For 1 heartbeat, no one understood what had happened. Then the ink fell. The black ceremonial inkstand tipped beside Nathaniel Ward's hand, rolled once against the treaty folder, and burst open across the map. A dark stain spread over cream parchment. Caleb Morrison lunged. Not toward the king. Toward the papers. That told Grace everything. She twisted free from one guard's grip as the other caught her shoulder. Pain flashed through her arm, but she barely felt it. Her eyes stayed on the table, on the ink bleeding across false mountains and beautiful lies, on Caleb's suddenly desperate hand trying to pull the hidden page back beneath the treaty. Too late. The spilled ink soaked through the top map. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the false border began to lift. Not the parchment itself, but a thin painted layer of it, softening under the ink, loosening like skin from a burn. Beneath the elegant false line, another line appeared in darker, older ink. The true line. Raven Pass curved inward where it belonged. Inside North Iron territory. A sound moved through the hall. Not a gasp. Not yet. Recognition was slower than shock. Grace saw Nathaniel's eyes lower to the map. He did not reach for the pen again. He did not move at all. But the air around him changed, cold and focused, as if every candle in the hall had been drawn into the edge of a blade. Caleb seized the corner of the hidden page. Grace pointed with her free hand. There, she said, breathless. Under his hand. A guard yanked her back. Be silent. Grace was done being silent. Your beta is lying. The words tore through Ironvale Hall. They hit the banners, the stone walls, the long treaty table, the nobles who had laughed when she said the map was wrong. They hit Alpha Roland Pierce, whose face had gone pale beneath his polished smile. They hit Caleb Morrison hardest of all. His hand froze on the hidden page. Nathaniel looked at him. Slowly. Move your hand. Caleb bowed his head, but his fingers did not lift. Your Majesty, the girl has caused enough confusion. Allow me to restore the documents before. Move your hand. This time, the command did not leave room for obedience to arrive late. Caleb lifted his palm. The second page lay beneath it. Thin, unmarked by North Iron ribbon, stamped faintly with the Westbrook pine watermark where the ink had dampened the corner. Grace's knees almost weakened. She had been right. That should have felt like triumph. It did not. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and watching the ground appear only after she had already jumped. Nathaniel reached down and pulled the hidden page free. He read in silence. No one breathed loudly enough to be blamed for it. Then his eyes stopped on one line. Grace knew which one before he spoke, because Caleb's face gave it away. Raven Pass, Nathaniel said, voice low, to be placed under Westbrook transitional control upon signature. The hall died. Not quieted. Died. Every noble, guard, scribe, servant, and visiting wolf understood at once what that meant. The pass was not a trade road. It was not a bargaining chip. It was the throat of the kingdom, the narrow defense line between the capital and any army patient enough to wait beyond the western pines. If Nathaniel had signed, he would have given his enemy the door. Grace stood trembling between two guards, one shoulder aching, white apron stained with wine and ink. Caleb turned toward her then. His expression was no longer smooth. It was naked hatred. But Nathaniel Ward did not look at the ruined table. He did not look at Alpha Roland. He looked at Grace Miller, and in his gray eyes, the maid who had broken his ceremony saw the first terrible shape of belief. Belief did not save Grace from the guards. Not immediately. The two men still held her between them, one hand locked around her upper arm, the other gripping the back of her apron as if a maid might flee after tearing open a kingdom's lie. Her shoulder burned. Her breath came too fast. Ink dripped from the edge of the treaty table onto the black stone floor, drop by drop, sounding louder than any noble dared to speak. Nathaniel Ward read the hidden page once. Then again. He did not shout. That was what made the hall afraid. A furious king gave people something to survive. A silent king made every man wonder whether judgment had already arrived and was simply choosing where to stand. Caleb Morrison recovered first because traitors practiced recovery. My king, he said, voice steady enough to fool someone who had not seen his hand freeze over the page. This is a draft clause. Nothing more. Westbrook requested transitional language. I intended to remove it before the final signature. Grace stared at him. A draft clause. A hidden page under the king's hand. A false seal. A painted borderline that gave away Raven Pass. A signal to Alpha Roland Pierce. A lie spoken cleanly enough to walk through blood without staining its shoes. Nathaniel lifted his eyes from the page. To remove it, he said, after placing it beneath my pen. Caleb bowed his head. The maid disrupted the order of review. She does not understand treaty procedure. There it was again. The maid. Not Grace. Not witness. Not the person who had seen the second page before any of them. Just a gray dress. Wet hands. A low place to throw doubt when the truth became inconvenient. Alpha Roland stepped forward, his expression arranged into offense. Your Majesty, Westbrook came here in good faith. I will not have this sacred negotiation destroyed by a servant's panic. Grace felt the grip on her arm tighten. The room wanted an answer it could live with. A servant's panic was easier than royal betrayal. A clumsy maid was easier than a beta selling the throat of the kingdom. If they chose to believe Caleb, the hall could repair itself. The ink could be wiped. The tablecloth replaced. The broken goblets swept away. Only Raven Pass would be gone. Nathaniel placed the hidden page flat beside the map. Lock the doors. The command landed softly. Then iron answered. Guards moved at every entrance. The great doors shut with a deep, final sound that rolled through Ironvale Hall like thunder trapped under stone. Nobles turned pale. Scribes clutched their papers. Westbrook wolves shifted uneasily near their alpha. Caleb's smile thinned. Nathaniel looked toward the men holding Grace. Release her. The guards obeyed at once. Grace stumbled when their hands left her, not because she meant to, but because fear had been holding her upright as much as they had. She caught herself on the edge of the serving table. Silver rattled beneath her palm. Nathaniel saw it. So did Caleb. For one small, strange moment, Grace wished no one had. Pain was safer when it remained invisible. The Alpha King turned back to the ruined map. Bring the archive copy. A scribe hesitated. Your Majesty, the royal archive copy is sealed below the East Gallery. It would take, bring it. The scribe ran. Caleb's jaw tightened. Grace noticed. Nathaniel noticed her noticing. His gray eyes returned to her face. You said the seal was wrong. Grace's throat felt dry. Yes, Your Majesty. Show me. The hall shifted again. Not with laughter this time. With attention. Grace stepped toward the treaty table, aware of every noble watching her cracked shoes cross the polished floor. She pointed to the wax seal darkened by ink. The true North Iron crown has 3 points. This one has 4. And the left wolf ear is 2 round. A murmur moved through the room. Caleb gave a short laugh. Many seals blur in hot wax. Grace looked at him then. Directly. So do lies, if enough ink touches them. No one laughed. Nathaniel's mouth did not smile, but something in his eyes sharpened. Then the archive copy arrived wrapped in black cloth and sealed with iron ribbon. The scribe placed it beside the ruined treaty with trembling hands. Nathaniel broke the ribbon himself. The true map opened beneath the candlelight. Raven Pass curved inward. North Ironland. Exactly where Grace had said. The hall stared at the 2 maps side by side. One honest, one altered, one kingdom, one trap. Alpha Roland's face lost its color. Caleb looked at the locked doors. Grace saw the calculation begin again. And this time, Nathaniel Ward stepped between him and the exit. Caleb Morrison looked at the locked doors first. Then at Grace. That was how she knew his next weapon would not be a blade. Blades were honest compared to men like him. A blade flashed, cut, left blood where everyone could see it. Caleb's kind of violence wore clean cuffs and spoke with measured grief. It did not stab the body first. It stabbed the story around the body until the victim looked guilty for bleeding. He turned to Nathaniel with a face arranged into wounded loyalty. My king, Caleb said, consider what we have truly seen. The hall remained frozen around the 2 maps. One honest, one altered. Between them lay the hidden page, damp with ink, its Westbrook watermark pale beneath the candlelight. Raven Pass sat in 2 places at once, where it belonged and where someone had tried to sell it. Nathaniel did not move from the space between Caleb and the exit. Speak carefully. I will. Caleb's voice softened. A servant girl with unknown loyalties disrupts a royal ceremony, destroys official documents, and somehow knows precisely where to spill the ink so a second map appears beneath the first. Grace felt the accusation before the hall did. It moved through the room like cold water. Caleb turned his gaze toward her. How? Grace's fingers tightened at her sides. She could barely pour water without trembling. Caleb continued. Yet she knows seals, borders, watermark stock, treaty clauses, and the defensive value of Raven Pass. Does that sound like a maid to you? The nobles shifted. Not much. Enough. Fear liked explanations that kept powerful men innocent. Alpha Roland Pierce stepped forward, seizing the opening with both hands. Westbrook has no interest in forged pages. Perhaps North Iron has enemies inside its own kitchens. Grace's stomach turned. There it was. The easier lie. Not the Beta. Not the visiting Alpha. Not the men whose hands had touched the treaty folder. A maid. A poor girl. Someone without family in the hall. Someone who could be removed, blamed, forgotten, and buried under the word conspiracy. Caleb pointed toward the ruined table. Search her room. Search her family. Ask why she was placed near the treaty table tonight. Ask who taught her to recognize Westbrook paper. Grace's breath caught. Her family. The word struck too deep because there was almost nothing left to search. A rented servant's cot. 2 dresses. Her father's old compass wrapped in cloth beneath a loose floorboard. A handful of notes she had never shown anyone because knowledge from a disgraced man could condemn a daughter faster than ignorance ever saved her. Nathaniel looked at her. Not accusing. Waiting again. But the hall was no longer kind enough to let waiting remain neutral. Grace heard whispers behind her. She knew too much. Maybe Caleb is right. Who was her father? Her father. A man erased so completely that even his name had become dangerous. Caleb saw the hesitation and pressed harder. Your Majesty, loyalty must be proven upward. If this girl serves your enemies, she has already succeeded in turning you against your most trusted advisor. Nathaniel's expression did not change, but Grace saw his hand close once at his side. Caleb had chosen his words perfectly. Trusted advisor. That was the wound beneath the treaty. Nathaniel could believe Grace and admit betrayal had stood beside him for years, or he could believe Caleb and make the world simple again. Grace lowered her eyes for half a second, not in surrender, to think. The hidden page, the seal, the false map, Caleb's hand, Roland's smile, the cracked wax, the Westbrook watermark. All proof. But proof could still be twisted if no one understood why she had seen it. Nathaniel spoke first. Grace Miller. Her name crossed the hall like a door opening. She looked up. How did you know Raven Pass was wrong? Caleb smiled faintly, as if the question had already trapped her. Grace felt every eye on her gray dress, her stained apron, her wet sleeves, her cracked shoes. The room expected shame. A stammer. A confession shaped by fear. Instead, she thought of her father's ink-stained hands. Then she lifted her chin. Because my father drew the original border, she said. The hall went still again. This time, even Caleb stopped smiling. Her father's name changed the air, not because everyone knew it, because Caleb Morrison did. Grace saw it in the smallest break of his face, the brief tightening near his mouth before he remembered to look insulted. It lasted less than a breath. Long enough. Nathaniel Ward saw it too. The Alpha King turned his head slightly toward Caleb, then back to Grace. His name. Grace's hands felt cold despite the heat of the black candles. Thomas Miller. A murmur moved through Ironvale Hall. Some nobles frowned, as if searching old memory. A scribe near the archive copy looked up too quickly. One of the older guards shifted his weight, recognition flickering across his face and vanishing beneath discipline. Caleb recovered with a quiet scoff. A disgraced surveyor. That explains much. Grace looked at him. The room blurred for half a second, not with tears, but with the force of 6 years pressing behind her eyes. Her father at the kitchen table. Her father's compass beside a half-finished map. Her father telling her the kingdom could survive war, hunger, even bad kings, but it could not survive men who moved borders in secret. He was not disgraced, Grace said. Caleb's smile sharpened. He was accused of selling boundary sketches to Westbrook. He was accused after he found a false treaty draft. The hall went silent. Nathaniel's gaze did not leave her face. You can prove that. Grace swallowed. Proof. Powerful people loved the word when they controlled where it was kept. He hid his notes before he disappeared, she said. Not enough to clear him then. Enough to teach me what to look for now. Caleb stepped forward. Convenient. Nathaniel did not look at him. Let her speak. That order held the room still. Grace drew a slow breath and walked toward the 2 maps. No guard stopped her this time. Her cracked shoes sounded too small against the stone floor, but the hall listened anyway. She pointed to the true archive map. My father taught me that Raven Pass is not valuable because of the road. It is valuable because of the cliffs. 50 defenders can hold the narrow throat for days. If Westbrook controls it, North Iron loses the western shield. She moved her finger to the altered map. Whoever forged this did not only redraw land. They opened a military route. Alpha Roland's face had gone hard. Grace turned to the hidden page. And this parchment is Westbrook stock. Pine Branch watermark. But the treaty language uses North Iron margin spacing. Someone copied our format onto their paper. The scribe leaned in, pale. She is correct, Your Majesty. Caleb's eyes flashed. Grace saw the danger in that look. So did Nathaniel. And the seal? Nathaniel asked. Grace touched the cracked wax with one careful finger. My father said forgers fail where pride stops looking. The North Iron crown has 3 points. This one has 4. The same mistake was on the document used to condemn him. The older guard near the pillar went very still. Nathaniel noticed. Captain. The guard bowed his head. I was a young escort then, Your Majesty. Thomas Miller claimed the seal was false before he vanished. Caleb's face lost color. For the first time, Grace heard the hall believe her in silence. Not fully, not kindly, but enough. Nathaniel looked at the false map, the hidden page, the cracked seal, then at the maid standing beside them with ink on her apron and her father's stolen knowledge in her voice. You were not guessing, he said. Grace lifted her chin. No, Your Majesty. Caleb's hand twitched at his side. Nathaniel stepped closer to the treaty table, his shadow falling across both maps. Then tonight did not begin with this treaty. Grace looked at Caleb. Neither of them blinked. No, she said softly. It began when my father saw the same lie and no king was close enough to hear him. The signet ring betrayed him first. Not the words. Not the silence. The ring. Caleb Morrison wore it on his right hand, a heavy silver band engraved with the North Iron Wolf crown. Grace had seen it 100 times from across dining halls and council corridors, flashing whenever he signed an order, sealed a letter, or lifted a glass beside men who trusted him. To everyone else, it was proof of rank. To Grace, now it looked like a key. Nathaniel Ward looked at the cracked wax seal on the treaty folder, then at Caleb's hand. Remove the ring. Caleb did not move. The hall understood that hesitation more clearly than any confession. Alpha Roland Pierce shifted one step back toward his wolves, but the locked doors gave him nowhere to go. Guards stood beneath every banner. Scribes clutched their papers. Nobles who had laughed at Grace earlier stared at the floor as if polished stone had suddenly become safer than her face. Nathaniel's voice lowered. Remove it. Caleb pulled the ring from his finger slowly. For the first time all night, his hands were not steady. A guard carried it to the treaty table and placed it beside the false seal. Nathaniel did not touch it. He looked at Grace. Can it make that mark? The question was impossible. Not because she did not know. Because the entire hall had just watched an Alpha King ask a maid to judge the proof. Grace stepped forward. Her apron was stained with ink. Her sleeve was damp. Her arm still ached where the guards had held her. She could feel every stare on her back, waiting for her to become small again. She did not. She bent over the ring. At first glance, the carving looked correct. Wolf head, crown, iron border. But the left ear was too round, and above the crown, 4 points rose instead of 3. The same mistake. Her father's mistake had been telling powerful men where to look. Grace lifted her eyes. Yes, Your Majesty. This is the forged seal. Caleb's face hardened. You would take the word of a maid over your own Beta? Nathaniel turned to him. No, he said. I took the evidence she had the courage to show me. The sentence struck the hall like a bell. Caleb moved then. Fast. Not toward Nathaniel. Toward Grace. He made it 2 steps before the king caught him. Nathaniel seized Caleb by the throat of his coat and drove him down against the treaty table. The false map crumpled beneath his shoulder. Ink smeared across his silver sleeve. The hidden page slid to the floor, its Westbrook watermark shining briefly in the candlelight like a ghost that had finally been named. No one breathed. Nathaniel leaned close enough that only the first row should have heard him, but the hall was too silent to hide anything. You sold my border, he said. You buried a second treaty beneath my hand. You let a maid be dragged because she saw what my court refused to see. Caleb's eyes burned with hatred. Your court is blind because you made it soft. No, Nathaniel said. My court became blind when it mistook closeness for loyalty. He released him. The guards seized Caleb at once, iron chains closing around the wrists that had almost signed away a kingdom. Alpha Roland tried to speak. Westbrook was misled. Nathaniel's gaze cut to him. Roland stopped. Take him too, Nathaniel ordered. Westbrook wolves reached for their weapons. North Iron guards were faster. Steel flashed only long enough to end the thought of resistance. No blood spilled. No battle began. That made the judgment colder. Cleaner. Complete. When Caleb and Roland were forced to their knees before the treaty table, Nathaniel turned to the room. Grace stood beside the ruined map, heart pounding, too aware of her cracked shoes on royal stone. She expected him to speak of treason, of borders, of punishment. Instead, he looked at her. The maid you tried to silence just saved my territory. The words moved through Ironvale Hall slowly, changing every face they touched. Grace lowered her eyes out of old habit. Nathaniel stepped closer. Do not lower your eyes for people who needed you to see. Her throat tightened. Around them, nobles bowed. Not to the king this time. To the truth he had placed in front of them. Marcus-like pride, polished titles, old blood, high seats. All of it had failed to notice what one maid with her father's memory had seen in a line of ink. Nathaniel lifted the forged ring from the table and placed it beside the true archive map. From this night forward, Grace Miller is under my protection. She will sit in my war council until Raven Pass is secured and every false border drawn against this kingdom is found. A sound moved through the hall. Shock, respect, fear. Grace could not name which part belonged to her. Nathaniel looked at her once more, his gray eyes no longer cold in the same way. You warned me before I signed, he said. That means North Iron still has a throat to defend. Grace thought of her father's hands, his compass, his maps hidden beneath loose floorboards, his voice telling her that borders were not ink, but lives waiting behind a line. For 6 years, no king had been close enough to hear him. Tonight, one had heard her. And as Caleb Morrison was dragged from Ironvale Hall in chains, Grace Miller stood beside the treaty table, no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer just the maid who cleaned where powerful men lied. She had seen the line before the king saw the ink. And because she spoke, the kingdom remained whole. The hall did not become safe when the traitors left it. That was the lie people wanted after chains closed and guilty men were dragged through locked doors. They wanted danger to leave with Caleb Morrison's polished boots. They wanted treason to be a person, not a rot beneath the floorboards. They wanted one forged ring, one hidden page, one altered map to explain how close North Iron had come to opening its own throat. Grace knew better. So did Nathaniel Ward. The Alpha King stood over the treaty table long after Caleb and Alpha Roland had been taken below to the iron cells. The ruined map lay between them, ink still spreading through false mountains, darkening rivers that had never moved, blurring the border line until Raven Pass looked less stolen and more wounded. Around the hall, no one quite knew what to do with her. That almost frightened Grace more than being grabbed by the guards. When she had been only a maid, the world had rules. Stand 3 steps back. Lower your eyes. Move when ordered. Speak only if asked. Become useful, quiet, and forgettable enough to survive. Now nobles looked away when she caught them staring. Scribes stepped aside before she reached them. Guards who had dragged her by the arm would not meet her eyes. One servant girl near the wine table whispered her name as if it had changed shape in the space of an hour. Grace Miller. Not girl. Not maid. A name. Nathaniel looked at the captain. Search Morrison's chambers. His office. His private correspondence. No document leaves this hall without my seal. Yes, your majesty. And send riders to Raven Pass tonight. Double the watch. No Westbrook envoy crosses the western road until I give word. The captain bowed and left at once. Grace listened, still standing beside the table because no one had told her where to go, and because leaving felt impossible while her father's ghost remained spread across the maps. Nathaniel turned to her. Only then did the hall seem to remember she was still there. Where are his notes? He asked. Grace did not pretend to misunderstand. Beneath the floorboard, under my cot. A few nobles exchanged looks. Of course they did. A kingdom's missing proof hidden beneath a servant's bed was the kind of truth highborn people disliked, because it made their archives look less reliable than poverty. Nathaniel's expression did not change. Who knows? No one. Good. The word was not praise. It was protection. Grace understood the difference. He stepped closer, stopping with the treaty table still between them. Close enough that she could see the ink on his fingers from where he had touched the hidden page. A king's hands, stained by a maid's warning. You will not return to the servants' quarters tonight. Grace stiffened. Old fear moved faster than reason. Your Majesty, I did not mean to overstep. I can gather my things and you misunderstand. His voice was quiet. The hall quieted with it. If Caleb had 2 more minutes, Raven Pass would have been gone. If my guards had pulled you from this room faster, my kingdom would be exposed by dawn. You will not sleep behind an unlocked servant's door while men loyal to him remain uncounted. Grace's throat tightened. Not because the words were soft. They were not. They were practical, controlled, royal. But inside them was something she had not been given in years. Consideration. Nathaniel looked toward the east stair. Prepare the archive chamber beside the council room. She stays under royal guard. A noblewoman near the dais could not keep silent. Your Majesty, placing a maid near the council archive will disturb order. Nathaniel turned his head. The woman went pale. Order, he said, nearly cost me my boarder. No one spoke after that. Grace looked down at the false map one last time. Raven Pass curved beneath ink and damage, still visible where the truth had survived under the lie. Her father had drawn that line. She had defended it with trembling hands, spilled ink, and a voice everyone tried to bury. Nathaniel followed her gaze. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will show me every mark your father taught you to fear." Grace lifted her eyes. This time, she did not lower them. "Yes, your majesty." The title felt different now. Not smaller, not safer, but honest. Behind them, servants began clearing broken glass from the floor. Scribes wrapped the forged treaty in black cloth. Guards sealed the doors again, not to trap the truth, but to keep it from being stolen before morning. Grace stood in the center of Ironvale Hall with ink on her apron, pain in her arm, and the terrible knowledge that saving a kingdom was not the end of danger. It was the beginning of being seen. The archive chamber smelled like dust and locked truths. Grace noticed that before she noticed the bed. The room beside the council hall had been prepared quickly, but not carelessly. A narrow cot stood near the far wall beneath a tall window of dark glass. A basin of clean water waited on a carved stand. Someone had left folded linen, a wool blanket, and a tray with bread, cheese, and a cup of tea gone untouched because her stomach had not yet remembered how to want food. But the shelves mattered more. They rose on every side of the chamber, black oak and iron ladders climbing toward shadowed rows of sealed boxes, rolled maps, treaty ledgers, boundary sketches, military surveys, and old council records tied with faded ribbon. The kingdom's memory lived here, guarded by locks, stamps, and men who had somehow missed the lie that a maid had seen on a table. Grace stood in the doorway with 2 royal guards behind her and ink drying on her apron. For one foolish second, she wished for the servants' quarters. Not because they were safer, because she knew how to be small there. Here, under the silent weight of maps and history, she had no place to hide from what had happened. Caleb Morrison was in chains. Alpha Roland was under guard. Raven Pass had not been signed away. Nathaniel Ward had placed her under royal protection before the entire hall. And still, her hands shook. A maid's body did not immediately understand that it was no longer allowed to be dragged. "Miss Miller." The voice belonged to the younger guard at the door. Mississippi Grace turned slowly. "Yes. The king ordered that no one enters without your permission or his." "Your permission?" The words felt too large for the room. Grace nodded because she did not trust herself to speak. When the door closed, silence settled around her so completely that she heard the rain against the window and the distant movement of boots beyond the corridor. She crossed to the basin and washed her hands. Ink clouded the water first, then a faint pink mark where the guard's grip had bruised her skin. She stared at the bruise. It was small, almost nothing, but it made the night real again. The grip, the laughter, Caleb's voice turning the hall against her. Nathaniel's gray eyes asking how she knew. Her own voice saying her father's name where powerful men could hear it. Thomas Miller. For 6 years, she had spoken it only in private. Grace dried her hands and reached into the inner pocket of her apron. Her fingers closed around the one thing she had carried since the day they told her father was gone. His compass. Small, brass, scratched along the edge. The glass cracked across the north mark. It no longer pointed perfectly, not after years beneath loose floorboards and servant trunks, but Grace had kept it because her father once told her a broken compass could still teach a person to distrust the road. She placed it on the archive table. Then she heard footsteps outside. Not hurried, controlled. The guard spoke low. A pause followed. Then the door opened. Alpha King Nathaniel Ward stood in the corridor with a black folder in one hand and candlelight along the hard line of his face. Grace straightened at once. Old habit. His eyes moved to the bruise on her wrist, then to the compass. He did not step inside. "May I enter?" For a moment, Grace did not understand the question. Kings did not ask maids permission to enter rooms in their own halls. But he waited, as if the order he had given the guards applied to himself too. Grace's throat tightened. "Yes, your majesty." Nathaniel entered and closed the door behind him. He placed the black folder on the table beside her father's compass. "We searched Morrison's office." Grace looked at the folder. The leather was damp at one corner, as if it had been hidden somewhere stone cold and recently disturbed. Nathaniel opened it. Inside lay 3 boundary sketches, all marked with her father's handwriting, all altered in another man's ink. Grace forgot how to breathe. Nathaniel watched her face, not the papers. "I think your father was not only telling the truth," he said quietly. "I think he left us the first map of the betrayal." Grace touched the edge of the nearest sketch. Her father's letters blurred beneath her vision, but she did not cry. Not yet. Outside the archive chamber, the kingdom slept badly behind locked doors. Inside, beside a cracked compass and a king who had finally come close enough to listen, Grace Miller realized that Raven Pass had only been the beginning. The first altered sketch showed Raven Pass. The second showed Ashen Ford. The third showed the old northern quarry road that no noble in Ironvale Hall had mentioned in years because forgotten roads were only forgotten by people who did not need to march through them. Grace knew all three, not as names in a ledger, as warnings. Her father had taught her that maps were never just drawings. A river was water until an army needed a crossing. A forest was timber until scouts used it for cover. A quarry road was abandoned until someone cleared the stones and called it a supply route after the gates were already open. She stood beside the archive table with her fingertips resting near Thomas Miller's handwriting, afraid to touch the ink as if grief could smear. Nathaniel Ward remained across from her, silent enough to let the room breathe around the truth. That was another thing Grace noticed about him. He did not fill silence because he owned it. He used it to listen. "These were in Caleb's office?" she asked. "In a locked compartment behind the eastern wall." Nathaniel opened the black folder farther. "My guards found Westbrook wax, 2 blank treaty sheets, and correspondence without signatures." Without signatures means he expected denial. It means he expected survival, Nathaniel said. Grace looked down again. Her father's handwriting slanted slightly upward on the edge of each map, small notes written in brown ink. Original line confirmed by Cliff Survey. Ford unsafe during winter flood. Quarry Road collapsed by royal order. Beside those notes, newer black ink corrected the borders. Not corrected. Corrupted. Ashen Ford had been shifted toward Westbrook control by half a mile. The quarry road had been marked as unusable, though her father's old symbol said sealed, not destroyed. Raven Pass had been redrawn exactly as she had seen it on the treaty table. 3 quiet changes. 3 doors. A kingdom did not need to fall all at once. It could be opened piece by piece while men drank to peace beneath iron banners. Grace's stomach tightened. "My father saw this pattern." Nathaniel's eyes lifted to her face. "Yes." He tried to warn someone. "Yes." And Caleb made him look like the traitor before anyone listened. Nathaniel did not answer quickly. That was enough. Grace stepped back from the table, one hand closing around the edge of her apron. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the shelves too tall, the locked boxes too full of decisions made by men who had never had to beg to be believed. For 6 years, people had said Thomas Miller sold maps. For 6 years, Grace had swallowed the word traitor in markets, kitchens, corridors, and servant lines because defending a disgraced man only made a poor daughter suspicious too. Now his proof lay beneath royal candlelight. Not perfect, not complete, but alive. Nathaniel reached into the folder and withdrew a smaller paper. This was folded inside the Raven Pass sketch. Grace recognized the paper before she saw the words. Cheap kitchen stock. The kind her father had used when proper parchment cost too much. Nathaniel placed it before her. Grace read the first line. "If this reaches the throne, do not trust Caleb Morrison." The room disappeared. Not violently. Softly. As if the walls had stepped away to give her grief more space. Her father's voice rose from the page in careful ink. "The borders are being moved under treaty cover. Raven Pass is first because a king will defend a fortress before he defends a line. Tell my daughter I was not afraid of dying. I was afraid she would grow up believing I lied." Grace pressed her fingers to her mouth. The sound she made was small, almost nothing, but Nathaniel heard it. He moved one step, then stopped, as if coming closer without permission would turn comfort into command. Grace lowered her hand slowly. "He knew," she whispered. Nathaniel's voice was quiet. He knew enough to hide the truth where Caleb would keep looking for it. Grace looked at the note again. There was more beneath the final line. A name. Not Caleb's. Not Roland's. Lord Everett Shaw. Grace had heard that name in the hall before. An old councilman. One of the men who had praised the treaty. One of the men who had laughed when Caleb called her a servant girl. Nathaniel saw the name when she did. The room changed. Not with grief now. With danger returning. Grace looked up at him. He was in the hall tonight. Nathaniel's face became the cold, controlled mask she had first seen beneath the iron banners. "Yes," he said. Outside the archive chamber, footsteps passed in the corridor. Slow, measured, then stopped. Grace turned toward the door. Her father's note lay open beside the maps. Nathaniel reached for the candle and pinched the flame out between two fingers. The chamber fell into darkness just as someone tried the handle. The handle turned once, then stopped. Grace did not breathe. In the sudden dark of the archive chamber, every sound became too large. The rain against the window, the soft settling of old paper on the shelves, the faint scrape of Nathaniel Ward's boot as he moved without hurry, without panic, placing himself between Grace and the door before whoever stood outside could see what the room had become. The handle turned again, this time slower. Testing. A voice came from the corridor, low and smooth. "Your Majesty?" "Lord Everett Shaw." Grace knew it before Nathaniel's eyes shifted toward her. The old councilman's voice had been polished by decades of speaking in rooms where men mistook age for honor. She had heard it earlier in the hall, warm with false concern as Caleb accused her, amused when nobles whispered about a maid who knew too much. Now it stood outside the door that was supposed to open only by her permission or the king's. Nathaniel did not answer at once. That silence saved them. On the table behind Grace lay her father's note, 3 altered maps, and the name Everett Shaw written in Thomas Miller's careful hand. Proof, fragile as paper, dangerous as a blade. The handle stopped moving. "My king," Everett said, "I was told you might be here. The council is unsettled. We should discuss Morrison before rumors spread." Grace's fingers closed around the edge of the archive table. Morrison, not Caleb. Morrison, the way a man distanced himself from a burning house after helping build the fire. Nathaniel stepped closer to the door, but did not open it. "The council can wait." A pause. Too short to be innocence. "Of course," Everett said. "But the maid should be removed from the archive. Her presence near royal records will cause questions." Grace felt the old fear rise. Not sharp this time. Tired. She had been a question all her life to people like Everett Shaw. Why could a poor girl read borders? Why did a servant remember seals? Why had Thomas Miller's daughter survived long enough to speak in a hall where her father had been silenced? Nathaniel's voice remained calm. "Then let the court ask better questions." The corridor went quiet. Then something slid beneath the door. A folded paper. Small. White. Grace looked at it. Nathaniel did not bend. Neither did she. The paper came to rest near his boot. On its outside was one sentence written in hurried black ink. "Give us the Miller notes, and the girl lives until morning." Grace's blood went cold. Nathaniel read it without touching it. For the first time, his stillness changed. Not broke. Changed. It became the kind of quiet that made wolves lower their heads before they knew why. Outside, Everett spoke again. "Some loyalties are older than Caleb Morrison, Your Majesty." Nathaniel opened the door. Not all the way. Only enough for candleless darkness to meet the corridor light. Lord Everett Shaw stood beyond it in a dark council coat, silver hair neatly tied, one hand resting on the head of his cane. Behind him, 2 men in servant livery stood too straight to be servants. His eyes went first to Nathaniel, then past him, to Grace. There was no surprise there. Only regret that she was still standing. "You should have stayed invisible, Miss Miller," Everett said. Grace stepped forward before Nathaniel could answer for her. Her heart hammered. Her hands were cold. Her apron still held ink from the treaty table. But her father's note was behind her, and his name had already spent 6 years buried beneath another man's lie. "No," she said. "That is what you needed my father to do." Everett's expression hardened. Nathaniel moved then. Fast enough that Grace saw only the result. One of Everett's false servants hit the wall with the king's hand locked around his throat. The second reached inside his coat, but the guards outside the corridor seized him before steel cleared cloth. Everett stepped back, his cane dropping against the floor with a hollow crack. A compartment sprang open inside it. Not wood. Iron. A narrow roll of Westbrook treaty paper slid out across the stone. The same pine branch watermark. The corridor froze. Nathaniel looked down at the paper, then at Everett. "Older loyalties," he said softly. Everett's face collapsed around the truth. Not fully. Powerful men rarely surrendered all at once. But enough. Grace reached behind her and lifted her father's note from the table. Her hands no longer shook when she held it up to the corridor light. "Thomas Miller named you," she said. Everett stared at the paper as if a dead man had stepped into the hall. Nathaniel's voice carried down the corridor, cold and absolute. "Lord Everett Shaw, You are arrested for conspiracy against North Iron Territory, falsification of royal borders, and the murder of Truth under council seal. Guards closed around him. This time, no one called Grace a maid. No one laughed. No one asked whether she understood the map. Everett was taken past her in chains, and as he passed, his eyes found hers with the fury of a man defeated by someone he had never considered worth fearing. Grace did not look away. When the corridor emptied, Nathaniel turned back to the archive chamber. Dawn had begun to pale the window behind the shelves, touching the maps with thin gray light. You saved more than Raven Pass tonight, he said. Grace looked at her father's handwriting, then at the king. No, she said quietly. My father started saving it 6 years ago. I only made sure someone finally listened. Nathaniel held her gaze. Then North Iron will listen now. For the first time since the treaty table, Grace let herself believe him. Not completely. Belief was too precious to spend all at once. But enough to stand in the archive chamber with ink on her apron, her father's compass beside royal maps, and the Alpha King at her side as the kingdom's hidden borders began to return to the light.